But if it's going to go, let it go with a bang rather than with a whimper.
Live coverage of the funeral of Pierre Elliott Trudeau later this morning here on CBC television.
Hi, I'm Liz McMullen. I'm an Air Force technician at CFB Comox.
With more pizzazz than we'd ever encountered. He put words and phrases into our language.
And Canada must be a just society.
He led us through some of our darkest hours.
How far would you go with that? How far would you extend that? Just watch me.
And he put his stamp on our history. He dominated his time as few Canadians ever have. Through high moments and low, we have been part of his life, and he has been part of ours. The death of Pierre Trudeau. A nation mourns. Montreal's on a overcast October morning, 1 hour away from the state funeral for Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Yes, a nation mourns, and it has been doing so for the past 5 days. Some remarkable scenes from Ottawa to Montreal and all the little towns along the way, the train ride in between those two cities. Well, we're about to add some more remarkable moments to the album of the final days for Pierre Elliott Trudeau, just an hour away now, as we said, from the state funeral for him here in Montreal. Good morning. I'm Peter Mansbridge, just outside the Basilica. Guests have been arriving here for most of the last couple of hours. Members of the general public gathered around outside the Basilica, but hundreds upon hundreds of guests flowing inside. The guest list is a snapshot of Canadian political life, the artistic world, you name it. The names on this list, they go on and on and on. There will be about 3,000 people inside. There are also a number of figures from the international stage. We know, as we did yesterday, that Fidel Castro is here. Jimmy Carter, the former U.S. president, is here as well, and many others. You're going to see them in the next hour as they enter the Basilica. Helping me with our coverage this morning, the documentary filmmaker Brian McKenna. You've been watching his series, Memoirs, that wonderful look at the Trudeau years, in many cases through Mr. Trudeau's own words as he reflected to Brian and his brother Terence on his days in office. Brian, we've witnessed quite a few scenes in these last few days. I think we all knew this was going to be quite a moment for the country as they said goodbye to Pierre Trudeau, but I don't think anybody understood just the depth of feeling that we've witnessed.
I'm not surprised by the depth of feeling, but I think I know someone who would be overwhelmed by the feeling, and that would be Pierre Trudeau. This Niagara of emotion would be the kind of white water that he would not be able to handle. And it's kind of, any time there's kind of an outpouring of emotion from the country, he was kind of baffled. I know when his son Michel died, and reflecting on it afterwards, I said, you know, the whole country was in the church with you that day. And he looked at me, just not fully recognizing the depth of the passion, all the different passions that Canadians have for Pierre Trudeau.
You know, many people were wondering over these past couple of days what the reception would be like here in Montreal when the body was brought back from Ottawa to lie in state in Montreal for roughly a 24-hour period before the funeral service would take place here at Notre Dame Basilica. Well, here at City Hall, Montreal City Hall, it was very much like it was in Ottawa over the weekend. Long lineups, doors had been planned to close around midnight. They stayed open until almost 4 o'clock in the morning, as they had in Ottawa both mornings, where hundreds upon hundreds, thousands upon thousands of people came, just members of the general public, to spend their last few seconds by the casket of Pierre Trudeau. Well, let's go over to Montreal City Hall now, where CBC's Dennis Trudeau is standing by. Dennis, let us know what's happening there now and what's about to happen.
Well, people have been coming to City Hall this morning, Peter, but as they see the streets open down to the Basilica, most of them have gone down towards Notre Dame Basilica to wait there, perhaps to hope to get a seat in the church or to listen and watch the funeral on the big screens outside. Here at City Hall, what's going to happen is that the immediate family of Mr. Trudeau is going to have a last, or maybe a next to last, private moment in the Hall of Honor where the former Prime Minister has been lying in state. And according to what I've been told, Sasha and Justin, his two sons, will be there. Margaret Trudeau, his first wife, will be there as well, his only wife. And also Deborah Coyne and Deborah Coyne's daughter, Sarah, the daughter Deborah Coyne had with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, will also be there in that group for a quiet family moment. After that, the RCMP detachment will bring out the casket here to the front of City Hall on Notre Dame, put it in the hearse, and then the immediate family will get in the cars behind the hearse. The hearse will move down Notre Dame, west on Notre Dame, to the Basilica with the RCMP squad marching beside the hearse. And that will take them to the front of the Basilica, where the official pallbearers will be waiting outside to greet the arrival of the casket of the former Prime Minister. At the moment here, we're waiting for that to happen, and some people have stopped to watch that last moment here at City Hall, but most people have moved down to be close to the Basilica for the funeral service.
All right, Dennis. Thank you very much. Dennis Trudeau, just outside Montreal City Hall. Here, back at the Notre Dame Basilica, as Dennis mentioned, not very far away from the City Hall, just a few minutes. The ride from the hearse will come here. That is still a good 40 minutes or so away. It'll be another 15 minutes or so before we see the removal of the casket from City Hall. Now, many people arriving here, including the current Premier of Saskatchewan, Roy Romanow. He's with David Holton right now. David?
Okay. Saskatchewan Premier Roy Romanow, you sat across the constitutional table on so many occasions with Pierre Trudeau. Your feelings now as you join this huge group of dignitaries coming into Notre Dame Basilica?
Well, I'm very saddened, and I also in a way feel that this is a moment of celebration as well. This is a person who taught us that Canada and Quebec can coincide, and I think it's a wonderful, wonderful legacy. I miss him a lot. They tell me the family's coming, so.
Thank you very much. So we see former President Jimmy Carter now arriving, Peter. We'll try and have a word with him as he comes in. One of the American presidents who actually Pierre Trudeau got on well with, his relations very tense with Richard Nixon, of course, sometimes with Ronald Reagan, but Jimmy Carter was one American president who on several occasions saluted the intelligence, the passion and the commitment of Pierre Trudeau. So we'll certainly try and talk to him in a moment.
All right, David, thanks very much. He's talking with a number of reporters, and he'll be going along the row there, and we'll catch up to him in a few moments' time. It is a remarkable scene in terms of the numbers, not only the numbers of people, but who these people are from different walks of life, politicians from all political stripes here to witness this final moment, including somebody who worked very closely with him over the period in office, and that was Joyce Fairburn, who was worked closely with him not only during office but after he left office as well. Here's Jason Moskowitz with Joyce Fairburn.
Senator Joyce Fairburn, longtime legislative assistant for Pierre Trudeau. Your thoughts this morning?
My thoughts, first of all, Jason, are sadness, obviously, but also the last few days and last night here in Montreal at the City Hall, I just can't imagine how proud Pierre would be, how appreciative and touched he would be with the reception that he has received from some of the people he cared about most, Canadians.
This outpouring across the country, you must have expected something. How close did it come to your expectations?
Oh, it far exceeded my expectations because, I mean, you know that people will come to these occasions, to come in the numbers, to wait for 5 hours, to stay till 4 in the morning with children, has just been an extraordinary experience for Canada. I mean, this isn't something that we have ever seen in Canada before. And the other
President Carter, the relations between Pierre Trudeau and U.S. presidents were often tense, but you had a good relationship with him. Talk to us a little bit about what Pierre Trudeau meant for you.
Well, when I was elected president in 1976, I had never served in Washington. And one of the first persons I invited to visit me in the White House was Pierre Trudeau and his new wife, Margaret. He was a very great source of information and advice for me because I had never been to a summit conference or never dealt with leaders in Europe or in Japan, he gave me sound advice as a personal friend. And throughout my own administration, and then since I left the White House, and since he left the prime ministership, he and I have retained our personal friendship. The last time I spent several hours with him was when my wife and I was celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. We went to Niagara Falls, which he had never seen. And very wonderfully, Pierre Trudeau was there also with his young daughter. So we spent hours together talking about old times. I think that more than any person I know, Pierre Trudeau has been a symbol of unity, of human rights, of democracy and freedom around the world, and was a great leader even to help American presidents.
You shared very much his concern. Thank you, sir. Peter, thank you. Former President Jimmy Carter.
Thanks very much, David. Jimmy Carter, representing the United States, but also clearly representing himself here at this state funeral, a close relationship that the former American president had with Pierre Trudeau, not only during their times in office, but also clearly afterwards, talking about that moment in Niagara Falls that they shared together on holiday. And it's so he now enters the Notre Dame Basilica, followed by the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Gordon Giffen. Ed Broadbent, the former leader of the NDP, was clearly shaken very badly by the news when it first broke last Thursday. Brian, you had a chance to put the two of them together for your series memoirs one more time on the floor of the House of Commons. There was a real relationship there.
One of the first things that Pierre Trudeau said to him was, Broadbent said, "So what do you think about Marxism now? As the Marxism was collapsing all around the world." And Trudeau said, "It's never been tried yet."
It's Eddie Goldenberg there in the middle of your picture, the man of short stature just walking out, who's perhaps the closest aide to Jean Chrétien, current Prime Minister, but was also a very close follower of Pierre Trudeau through the Trudeau years in government. Spectacular inside of the Notre Dame Basilica, just an overwhelming structure when you're inside here, and you're going to see it reflected on through the television pictures, but it is very powerful feeling when you're inside this basilica.
It's interesting, Peter, the whole, representatives of Canada's political and economic elite are here to celebrate a man who defied them so often. From the Premier of Quebec, Bouchard, to Deputy Minister Landry, right across the spectrum to all the former prime ministers of Canada now alive, John Turner, Brian Mulroney, obviously, will all be here. And celebrating a distinctive Canadian who had an uncommon view of the world.
There will be motorcades arriving here every minute or so over the next 45 minutes here at Notre Dame Basilica, carrying friends, colleagues, adversaries. You'll recognize many of these figures. David Peterson, the former Premier of Ontario, and his wife, Shelley, with Joyce Fairburn, who you met just a moment ago when she was talking with Jason Moskowitz. David Peterson, who came into office in Ontario well after Pierre Trudeau had left office in Ottawa.
Former Premier Bill Davis is on the guest list. He's expected to be here. And he's obviously someone who had a profound relationship with Pierre Trudeau, even though they were separated by parties. Trudeau believes firmly that he would not have been able to patriate the Constitution without Bill Davis. There's Deputy Premier Bernard Landry.
Let's go down into the crowd again outside, where David Holton is with former Prime Minister Joe Clark. There's John Turner, by the way, who is just arriving here, but let's hear from Joe Clark first, and then we'll hear from John Turner.
You had a very eloquent tribute to Pierre Trudeau in the House of Commons a few days ago, but didn't mask your divisions with the man. What do you feel today?
I'm pleased that the country is responding as it is to the life of Pierre Trudeau. I think it's the life that is being celebrated. Everyone regrets his death. I'm struck by the fact that with very few exceptions, people who opposed ferociously some of his measures nonetheless recognize and respect the character of the man. I'm from an old school. I believe with Joseph Howe that a wise nation honors its great leaders, and Pierre Trudeau was one of our great leaders. And I think it's entirely appropriate that there should be this response today.
As someone, sir, who faced him on both the government benches and the opposition benches, what are your personal memories of Pierre Trudeau in the House?
He was very tough in the House, but he was also prepared to make the Parliament work. It wasn't an artificial place for him. You'll recall some of those debates. We actually did get agreement on some procedural matters. I think of the decision to have the constitutional debates televised, which was very important and was actually negotiated there on the floor of the House. So he wasn't rigid, he wasn't afraid of the place, he wasn't contemptuous of it, as some people suggested. He knew how to use it and wanted it to work. The other recollection I have was that for all of the ferocity of the debate, and he and I had some ferocious differences, at the end of the day, his human side was always evident. I think most particularly towards my family. He was above all a parent, and a parent took a parent's interest in other people's children.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Peter.
Brian Mulroney now arriving. We're told all the former prime ministers are here today. Brian Mulroney, all the living former prime ministers, obviously. Brian Mulroney, saw Joe Clark, John Turner. Jean Chrétien, of course, will be here. Kim Campbell is said to be here, although I didn't see her name on the list for some reason. We'll be hearing from Mr. Mulroney in a moment. Pierre Mark Johnson, Daniel Johnson, the former Premier of Quebec, former Liberal leader.
Somebody else begs.
Former Prime Minister Mulroney said yesterday to one of his aides that he was struck by the outpouring of emotion for Pierre Trudeau over the weekend, and he didn't expect quite the same for him.
All right, David Halton is with Lucien Bouchard.
Mr. Bouchard, very mixed feelings, obviously, for you as you come here to pay your last respects to Pierre Trudeau today.
I think that for all of us, it's a tribute to the great personal qualities of Mr. Trudeau, and the fact that he played a huge role in the recent history of Canada and Quebec, and whose actions were recognized in the international scene.
The obvious, there's a great outpouring in English Canada and French Quebec, a mixed feeling.
I have to go.
Premier Lucien Bouchard, Peter, brief comments as he goes into the Basilica Notre Dame.
Thank you, David. Fidel Castro is here now. They are coming every few seconds. It's quite an amazing scene. The Cuban leader arrived yesterday. The relationship between these two men, Pierre Trudeau and Fidel Castro, lasted for decades, and as a clear signal of that friendship, Mr. Castro made the trip up from Cuba last night. And Brian, another person who you had the opportunity to place together with Mr. Trudeau in the filming of memoirs. We heard Mr. Bouchard's remarks coming in here, and there's Brian Mulroney with his wife Mila. Remarkable shots, these of the collection of faces and towering figures on the not only the national but the international landscape. You want to finish that?
So Brian Mulroney
story?
said that he didn't expect the same outpouring for him, but he wasn't anxious to find out.
No.
Fidel Castro and Pierre Trudeau were a remarkable pair of men together. To see them debating, to see the Jesuit trading in both of them as they went back and forth with the great issues of the world through history, politics, both obviously having an ambiguous relationship to the United States. And in Castro's darkest hours, Pierre Trudeau was always willing to stand up for him and for Cuba.
For Lucien Bouchard, these past few days have been well, shall we say, interesting. There was much debate here in Quebec in the first 24 hours because it seemed to take a while to have the flags lowered. Mr. Bouchard got quite testy when challenged about that. There's Castro and Jimmy Carter. Boy, for a microphone in there. Well, the relationship, obviously, between those two countries is one that is still extremely testy at times.
President Castro always works with an interpreter, but he understands English very, very well.
Well, they share at least one thing in common. They're two old ball players. They both played pretty good baseball, both Castro and Carter, in their younger days. In fact, there was even talk for Castro in his youth that he could have made it to the bigs. I'm not sure whether they've met before. Something tells me that they have, and since Carter's been out of office, as we all know, he's abandoned protocol in a lot of areas of the world. I'm not sure if they have.
One of the areas where Castro and Trudeau did disagree was on the fall of the Soviet Union. Trudeau thought it was basically a good thing what Gorbachev had done, and Castro listened to Trudeau saying this, and he turned to Trudeau and said, Gorbachev did what Nazi Germany was unable to do, destroy the Soviet Union. A Stalinist to the end.
Stockwell Day talking with reporters on his arrival. Day never having met Trudeau, yet talking last week about the impression he had of him and how he affected his own political life. Here we are back at City Hall, just a few blocks away, where the beginning of the procession, the carrying of the body of Pierre Trudeau from City Hall, the RCMP escort, the bearer party.
These 8 Mounties carrying that casket, that is an image that will be forever part of Canadian history. And the sense of the weight that they're carrying, you have a sense that they're carrying more than a casket. They're somehow carrying a legacy. And so many Canadians would like to be there giving them a hand.
Hall of Honor inside the Montreal City Hall. Flag-draped coffin about to make its last public journey from City Hall here to Notre Dame Basilica, following the funeral service. Remains will be taken by the family for a private burial. It's not known where. And the family is asked that people please respect their wishes, that those moments remain private. Single rose, which has become such a symbol these past few days, He always wore a fresh one every day in the House of Commons.
The rose, Peter, of course, is the ancient symbol of love and fidelity, and he chose it as a symbol of his love and fidelity to the country, and now it's coming back to him in full measure.
Both here in Montreal and in Ottawa, of course, the roses piled high here outside his home in Ottawa around the Centennial Flame. And then yesterday you witnessed so many of those scenes where people were placing roses along the rail side in between the tracks, handing them up to Justin and Sasha as they were passing through the small towns of eastern Ontario, western Quebec. And today many of the people who have been coming here to the Basilica have been carrying roses, and there outside City Hall they're doing the same. See a small crowd outside City Hall. Most people have gathered here outside the Basilica and are watching these same pictures on giant screens outside the Basilica. There's a hush fallen over the crowd here around the Basilica as the arrivals have stopped here. Most people are now inside the church. Just above these stairs, of course, that the famous speech from the former president of France, Charles de Gaulle, Vive le Québec libre, was given from a balcony. It set off such a debate inside the country, inside the province, inside the federal cabinet. Pierre Trudeau took the lead in that debate. He was Attorney General and Justice Minister. Shortly after, a very tough-worded statement from the Prime Minister of that day, Lester Pearson, that Mr. de Gaulle left. Justin and Sasha, that's Deborah Coyne, and Sarah, her daughter, by Pierre Trudeau, who have joined the procession today. Margaret in the back. I'm not sure, I believe that's Margaret's mother with her.
And death is bringing everyone together.
Sarah has not been seen in public very often, but it was interesting to hear the story from Jimmy Carter talking about spending some time in Niagara Falls at the time of his 50th wedding anniversary with his wife and meeting up with Pierre Trudeau and his daughter, Sarah. There was a close relationship there. Mr. Trudeau traveled quite often, quite frequently to Ottawa, where she lives now, to see her and to spend time with her.
Someone said they look like the young princes. It's hard to be certain from this distance, Peter, but I believe the woman with the white hair was Sasha, who's just saying hello to that person, is Trudeau's older sister, Suzette.
Cortege now forming, various family members getting into the vehicles to begin the procession through Old Montreal to the Notre Dame Basilica. Seems the heart of this city has come to a standstill at this time. Streets are lined. There's a huge crowd outside the Basilica. The leaves began falling here just in the last few days. Time of year that the former Prime Minister loved most. Clearly the outdoors in the fall.
It's also the time of year there was another funeral procession that went past City Hall to Notre Dame in the middle of the October crisis. The funeral for Pierre Trudeau's old seatmate at Brebeuf College, Pierre Laporte, the Quebec Labour Minister. When Pierre Trudeau came to power, the RCMP was a very Anglo force, and he told me that he was quite determined to make it a bilingual one, and he did.
The Prime Minister arriving here outside Notre Dame Basilica. Speaking with reporters, and he'll work up that aisle of microphones, giving interviews in both French and English as the slow march RCMP escort heads towards the Basilica here in downtown Montreal.
Yesterday it was the funeral train gliding through the countryside of the Canada he loved so much, and today it is the black limousines and hearse carrying him through the streets of the city he loved so much, his Montreal.
Let's hear from the Prime Minister now, who's with David Halton. David?
It was marvelous to work with him, to discuss with him. I have some marvelous souvenirs, and you know, now it's a celebration in many ways because he was what we wanted all of us to be. And anywhere in the world I traveled, you know, his name is always coming up, and it will be like that for generations to come.
Are you surprised at the outpouring of affection? For example, all the people lining the railway routes yesterday?
You know, he had marked his people very deeply, and a lot of people who never had the occasion to express their feelings managed to express them with great eloquence in the last few days. Thank you.
Thank you. There it is, Peter, the Prime Minister, going into the Basilica now. Back to you.
Prime Minister, it's been obvious to anybody who has seen or heard him in these past few days how difficult this period has been, not only for him, but also for his wife, Madame Chrétien, whose face yesterday told a story of anguish and grief.
When we did the scene of them together discussing the patriation of the Constitution, sort of behind the scenes, Chrétien always called him boss. And was always a little wary of Pierre Trudeau, but loved him.
Many have speculated over these past couple of days what that may mean for the political future in this country, not only the possibility of an election, which seemed to be the only topic of discussion just a week ago. It seems like a century ago now.
Lord, may this sacrifice which has made our peace with you.
Not only about the election thoughts, but also about Mr. Chrétien's own political future and whether he's been thinking again about whether or not he will be staying around for another fight or not.
It's interesting, Lucien Bouchard the other day at his press conference said, well, Pierre Trudeau has made his last intervention in Canadian politics, and I think he was premature. Pierre Trudeau is clearly making a different kind of intervention in Canadian politics that will have still an untoward and unknown effect on the next couple of years.
Well, there's no doubt that the past 5 days have brought back all the stories, all the issues, all the ideas that Mr. Trudeau had about this country, and have brought them back to center stage and brought them back for review and assessment. And it's brought a whole new generation into debating those thoughts.
In both official languages, you know, the memoirs ran in French as well as in English over the weekend, and I think a whole generation of Quebecers, the French-speaking Quebecers, who have heard nothing but the vilification of Pierre Trudeau for all of these years, perhaps saw a different Pierre Trudeau, an unexpected one.
The Chrétiens now about to take their places inside the Basilica as the slow procession continues its way. Prime Minister's arrival a few moments ago signaled that there is only one other major arrival to happen here in preparation for the arrival 15 minutes or so from now of the funeral cortege itself, and that will be the Governor General, Adrian Clarkson, who is due here in the next couple of minutes, representing the Queen, of course, as head of state of Canada. The royal family is represented by Prince Andrew. We haven't actually seen him yet. Perhaps he's traveling with the Governor General, I'm not sure. But Prince Andrew was here in the country, was a friend of Pierre Trudeau's, and chose to be here at the funeral as a friend. They're said to be just moments away from the Basilica now. Well, in the moments before the arrival of the Governor General, I'd like to introduce Father Jacques Manette, who is with us here today, and as we're preparing ourselves for what will be a very special funeral service here at Notre Dame Basilica, we are going to have Father Manette through the service at certain moments when explanations are needed. You will be hearing him explain what's about to happen, but we do have the opportunity now to have a brief conversation with Father Manette about what we are about to witness. How traditional oh, well, just a minute. Here's Adrian Clarkson, the Governor General, has arrived with her husband, John Ralston Saul. She's going to, we're told, do a short interview in French, first of all, and then we'll be speaking as well with the English reporters on her thoughts. She issued a statement on the night of the death of Pierre Trudeau, expressing her sadness. And these will be some of her first public comments, besides the statement from the other day. She's heading over to Jason Moskowitz. Jason.
Good morning, Your Excellency. Your thoughts this morning, please?
I'm here as Governor General of Canada to represent all the people of Canada at this funeral service of a great Canadian a great prime minister and somebody who has marked the 20th century. It's very fitting, I think, that there should have been such an outpouring of emotion for him, because I think he touched us all. He melded his psyche with ours, and I think that is something we will always remember of him.
The outpouring, is it beyond any expectation you expected?
No, I would have expected this. I think it's perfectly right.
Thank you. Peter?
Thanks, Jason. Governor General Clarkson now crossing the entranceway there to talk to some of the other reporters as well. The cortege continues to wind its way. Now, I was just mentioning Father Jacques Manette, who has joined us. Father Manette, welcome. And some sense of this service. How different will this service be than the traditional Catholic funeral service?
Well, basically it will be the traditional Catholic service, which, as you know, is an act of worship that is celebrating the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and therefore inviting us to think and to realize that death is a passage to a more wonderful life. It's also celebrating the life of the deceased person, in this case Mr. Trudeau, and thanking God for all that he's done for us and all that God has done for us through him. And then it's gathering together our grief at having to live henceforth without his physical presence, but also commending him to the mercy of God and to the love of God. And that's true of every Christian funeral, actually. What's particular about this one is the setting. We're in the Mother Church of Montreal. We're just hearing the bells now from the towers. And it's the celebrants, the people who have been chosen to, like Cardinal Turcotte, to concelebrate the Eucharist, to do the readings, who are personal friends. They're chosen, I noticed this morning, not because of their office, but because of their personal links with Mr. Trudeau. The same is true for the pallbearers, for example, and for the singers who will be singing the hymns and so forth, have a personal connection. So that gives it the particular significance of this morning is more in the choice of readings. The reading from the prophecy of the prophet Daniel, for example, that Sacha Trudeau will read, is obviously, he must have chosen it because it reminded him of his father. It's about the tree that blossoms and gives shade to the birds and to the animals and so forth, and then is cut down, and the roots stay in and feed the grass all around it and are the source of a new life, which is very much, I think, what most of us realize about the passing of Mr. Trudeau, that there's a legacy that is, and a spirit that continues with us. So I think that it's those touches that make it a particular funeral, that make it specific to Mr. Trudeau's life and to his meaning for us.
Now, we should alert our viewers to the fact that much of it will be in Latin. And,
that's right,
and
yes.
As a result, it will be, just to let them
this
know, first of all, that during those periods, we will be giving an English translation at the bottom of your screen to what's going on.
Most of it will be in French and in English, but the hymns that have been chosen, many of them are traditional hymns from the time when the liturgy, the Catholic liturgy, was in Latin. They're very beautiful hymns. I'm sure they were chosen because they spoke very much to Mr. Trudeau, to people of his generation who would have become used to those hymns when they were serving Mass, for example, or worshipping, as he did, at Saint-Viateur d'Outremont and so forth. The Dies Irae, the one that we will hear immediately after the second reading, for example, is a very beautiful requiem hymn. the In Paradisum at the end, praying that the angels will carry him into the mercy of God, which inspired Shakespeare to write, "In flights of angels carry you, take thee to thy rest," is in fact the hymn that has been through the ages associated with Catholic funerals.
All right, Father Minette, we thank you for that sense of preparing us for what we're about to see, and once again to our viewers, Father Minette will be coming on occasionally during the service with explanations when they're necessary, but obviously our intention here is to allow this service as much as possible to unfold just as if you were inside the Basilica itself without any interruptions. Brian, Pierre Trudeau's relationship with the church, in terms of what you were able to witness, what he talked about, the importance of the church in his life.
He was profoundly spiritual, but he didn't believe in sort of the big church. I asked him, what about your sons? What did you do? And he says, well, I raised them as Catholics, but then I gave them their own choice after that. But his own brand of Catholicism, in so many ways, he beat his own path through the forest on this true. He was a follower of a school of Catholicism called personalism. He was called a Protestant Catholic by his teachers at Brebeuf.
Cortege now arriving in front of the Basilica. Let's listen. Once again, applause breaking out in the crowd of anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 who have gathered around the Basilica area. Jimmy Carter. Honorary pallbearers now taking their position.
Pierre Trudeau's brand of Catholicism was worker priests, was liberation theology, was Jesuits going into missions, helping the poor and the underprivileged. That was Pierre Trudeau's kind of Catholicism. And certainly in Quebec in the 50s, that's what he was out there doing as a Catholic, very much as a Catholic.
Sarah Coyne, Margaret Trudeau, former Margaret Trudeau. Somehow I think this country will always think of her as Margaret Trudeau. Being hugged now by Marc Lalonde. Romeo Leblanc, the former Governor General, very close friend of the Prime Minister, was on that final outdoors trip with him earlier this summer. President Carter talking with Sarah Coyne, and you recall the story he told David Holton. He'd met her in Niagara Falls a few years ago. What a remarkable scene. Pitfield Council, a very close friend of former Prime Minister who has been battling his own medical difficulties over these past years, Senator Pitfield now. It's just out of your picture. That's Justin.
And on the right, Leonard Cohen.
Jacques Hébert hugging the eldest Trudeau son. Single rose being placed on top of the casket. casket, followed by the family and the honorary pallbearers. As Father Minette mentioned a few moments ago, Sacha Trudeau will give one of the readings. Justin Trudeau will take part in the eulogizing of his father. Father Minette.
I think the prayers that are going to welcome the body of Mr. Trudeau now recall the prayers that the priest uses in welcoming the baby at baptism, so that there's a reference here to the cycle of life, that as the Christian life began in baptism and
Pierre et
welcomed
Trudeau,
into the
je te
church.
souhaite la
So
bienvenue dans l'Église de Dieu,
now
dans l'Église
being
Notre-Dame.
welcomed into eternity.
J'offre mes sympathies et condoléances aux membres de la famille Trudeau, ainsi qu'à tous les amis de M. Trudeau. Toi seul, Seigneur, peux nous rendre la confiance quand il nous semble que la mort est victorieuse. Augmente aujourd'hui notre foi en ton Fils Jésus ressuscité des morts. Affermis notre espérance de la résurrection de Pierre Elliott, ton serviteur et notre frère, par Jésus
through
le
the
Christ,
life and
notre
good
Seigneur.
offices of your servant and your brother.
family and the honorary pallbearers now taking their position. And the family was led into their pew by, well, you see Margaret and Sasha, Deborah Coyne, Sarah, and the elderly lady to the extreme left here, coming into the shots here, and is Suzette, Pierre Trudeau's sister. Now the service.
Au nom du Père et du Fils et du Saint-Esprit. Amen. Que le Dieu de l'espérance vous donne en plénitude la paix dans la foi et que le Seigneur soit toujours avec vous. Au début de cette célébration, je veux exprimer mes plus vives condoléances
my deepest
aux
condolences
enfants de M.
to
Pierre
the
Elliott
children
Trudeau,
of Mr. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Justin,
Sarah,
Sasha, and
à tous les
Sarah,
membres de sa famille
to all the members of his
et à tous
family,
ses amis.
and to all his friends.
Madame Adrienne
Madame
Clarkson, gouverneur
Adrienne
général
Clarkson,
du Canada,
Governor General
et
of
Monsieur
Canada,
Madame Lise Thibault,
Madame Lise Thibault,
lieutenant-gouverneur du
Lieutenant
Québec,
Governor of Quebec,
Monsieur Jean Chrétien,
Mr. Jean
Premier
Chrétien,
ministre du
Prime
Canada,
Minister
et
of
Madame
Canada, and Madame
Monsieur
Chrétien,
Lucien Bouchard,
Mr.
Premier ministre
Lucien
du
Bouchard,
Québec,
Premier of
Madame
Quebec, and Madame Bouchard,
Pierre Bourque,
Mr.
maire
Pierre
de
Bourque,
Montréal,
Mayor of Montreal,
distingués invités
distinguished
de tous les
representatives
pays
of
étrangers,
various levels of government
représentants,
and public
représentantes des
institutions,
divers paliers de gouvernement et des institutions publiques, chers confrères évêques,
dear
prêtres,
colleagues,
diacres,
bishops and priests, dear
chers
friends
amis représentants
representing
des différentes églises, sœurs
different faiths
et des divers groupes religieux,
and various religious groups,
sœurs et frères,
sisters and brothers,
sisters and brothers in Christ. Nous sommes
we are
rassemblés
gathered
pour
here
rendre un dernier
to
hommage
render final
à
homage
Pierre
to
Elliott
Mr.
Trudeau,
Pierre Elliott Trudeau
pour le confier à Dieu,
and entrust him unto
pour
God
qu'il l'accueille
that he
dans
may
son
receive
royaume.
him into his kingdom.
Monsieur Trudeau a
Mr.
été un homme
Trudeau was a
public
devoted
dévoué,
public figure
un homme de
and a
famille,
caring family man.
attentif aux siens. Aussi,
We thus
nous éprouvons
deeply feel
douloureusement sa perte.
are losing him.
Mr. Trudeau lived as a servant of the people. He was a man of compassion and truly faithful to his friends. Thus, we mourn his loss with great sorrow. I want to express my deepest sympathy to his family, to his friends. Je vous invite tous
I
à
invite you
prier
all
avec moi
to pray
au cours
for
de
him,
cette
to
cérémonie
join me in prayer,
et à le remettre
and to
dans les mains
confidently
du Seigneur avec
entrust him to the
Puisse
Lord.
Monsieur Pierre Elliott Trudeau
May Mr. Pierre Elliott
trouver dans le
Trudeau
royaume de Dieu
find in the kingdom of God
l'accomplissement de la justice
the
et
achieving
de la
of
paix
justice and peace
qu'il a
that he
cherché
sought
et promu
and
sur
held
la terre.
dear in life.
Prions le Seigneur. Seigneur, tu nous as créés pour la vie et la mort ne peut pas te résister. Tu as enraciné notre confiance en toi dans le mystère de la croix de ton Fils Jésus et tu nous as marqués pour toujours du signe de sa résurrection. Délivre ton serviteur, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, de tout ce qui peut le retenir loin de toi. Fais-lui partager le bonheur de tes amis, les saints, les saintes, par Jésus-Christ ton Fils, notre Seigneur, notre Dieu, lui qui règne avec toi et le Saint-Esprit, maintenant et pour les siècles des siècles.
J'invite M. Jean Chrétien à venir nous faire part de la première lecture.
Première lecture, première épître aux Corinthiens 15. Si l'on prêche que le Christ est ressuscité des morts, comment parmi nous peuvent-ils dire qu'il n'y a pas de résurrection des morts? S'il n'y a pas de résurrection des morts, le Christ non plus n'est pas ressuscité. Mais si le Christ n'est pas ressuscité, alors notre prédication est vide, vide aussi notre foi. Car si les morts ne ressuscitent pas, le Christ non plus n'est pas ressuscité. Et si le Christ n'est pas ressuscité, votre foi est vaine. Vous êtes encore dans vos péchés. Alors, aussi ceux qui sont morts dans le Christ ont péri. Si c'est pour cette vie seulement que nous avons mis notre espoir dans le Christ, nous sommes les plus malheureux de tous les hommes. Mais non, le Christ est ressuscité des morts, car la mort étant venue par un homme, c'est par un homme aussi que vient la résurrection des morts. De même, en effet, que tous meurent en Adam, tous aussi revivront dans le Christ. Ainsi donc, mes frères bien-aimés, montrez-vous fermes, inébranlables, toujours en progrès dans l'œuvre du Seigneur, sachant que votre labeur n'est pas vain dans le Seigneur. Nous rendons gloire à Dieu.
J'invite maintenant M. Alexandre Trudeau à venir nous faire part de la deuxième lecture.
This is a special reading that Sacha Trudeau will read. It is from the Old Testament and is a reflection on death as a source of life. It's from the prophecy of Daniel.
Lecture tirée du livre du prophète Daniel. Voici un arbre au centre de la terre, très grand de taille. L'arbre grandit, devint puissant. Sa hauteur atteignait le ciel. Sa vue, les confins de la terre. Son feuillage était beau, abondant son fruit. En lui, chacun trouvait sa nourriture. Il donnait l'ombre aux bêtes. Dans ses feuilles nichaient les oiseaux du ciel, et toute chair se nourrissait de lui. Je contemplais les visions de ma tête sur ma couche. Voici un vigilant, un saint du ciel descend. À pleine voix il crie, abattez l'arbre. Brisez ses branches, arrachez ses feuilles, jetez ses fruits. Que les bêtes fuient son abri et les oiseaux ses branches. Mais que restent en terre souches et racines, dans des liens de fer et d'airain. Dans l'herbe des champs, qu'il soit baigné de la rosée du ciel, et que l'herbe de la terre soit sa part, avec toute l'humanité.
The hymns now are a response to the reading we've just heard, and they are taken from the Dies Irae, a very traditional Latin hymn. It goes back to the Middle Ages, and it is traditionally sung at Catholic funerals. the gospel will now speak of God's love as a motivation for Mr. Trudeau's generous service to all of us.
Avant de passer de ce monde à son Père, Jésus disait à ses disciples, « Comme le Père m'a aimé, moi aussi je vous ai aimé. Demeurez dans mon amour. Si vous êtes fidèles à mes commandements, vous demeurerez dans mon amour, comme moi, j'ai gardé fidèlement les commandements de mon Père, et je demeure dans son amour. Je vous ai dit cela pour que ma joie soit en vous et que vous soyez comblés de joie. Mon commandement, le voici. Aimez-vous les uns les autres comme je vous ai aimé. Il n'y a pas de plus grand amour que de donner sa vie pour ses amis. Acclamons la parole de Dieu.
Now apply the word of God to the grief of this congregation.
La lecture qu'a faite il y a quelques instants le Premier ministre
given
Jean Chrétien
a few minutes earlier by the Prime Minister Jean Chrétien was an act of faith in the resurrection of Christ written by St. Paul. This text was held dear by Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He had chosen this at the time of the funeral of his son Michel. It's a radical, rigorous, and notable text which expresses his faith as he wished to actualize it for himself, a deep faith linked to the essentials in life, held dear on a personal level with a constant concern to live through reason above passion. If Sasha chose to read this beautiful text of the prophet Daniel, it was in remembrance of his Sunday afternoons in Ottawa, where he and his two brothers would sit with their father, and he'd read to them his favorite pages of the Bible being a heritage of poetry that the father wished to pass on to his children, to get closer to their roots and to embellish life, to transmit to those people that he loved above all others in the world the profound values that had fed and nurtured his entire existence. We knew him to be an admirable father who instilled a respect for the sacred in his children, who fed on spiritual values and knew how to incarnate these in the home, despite the very busy life which was his lot. In his poetic style, linked to the life of the Israelites, Daniel described a tree in the middle of a field, a tree that meant to him the strength of man faced with his God. For us, a tree representing man, the man who has caused us to be gathered here today. The height reaches towards the heaven. Its width encompasses earth, which allows us to encompass and look forward to higher ideals, that we can go beyond ourselves and that we can have an influence beyond ourselves in the world, on one condition, that this tree reaching out to the heavens be well anchored by its roots to the earth, which gave it life, that these roots represent the links of iron and strength, as we wish for everyone who rises above their own common day-to-day lives, as Pierre Trudeau did, as he lived. throughout his legendary life of freedom of thought and of action, and through the turmoils of politics, he remained true to what was dearest to him, his family, his friends, his country, and his faith. We know all about Pierre Trudeau's political public life. Now's not the time to go over that, but that will always remain just one facet of his life, the more visible facet of his life. But he would go pray with the Benedictine monks near his home at lunch hour. Simple, faithful believer, he would go to his parish church on Sundays. During evening private conversations, he would speak of the Bible, the role of the church, and the transmitting of values. He wished it to discuss, not for a mere intellectual gain, which he certainly could have won, but to broaden his scope and knowledge, sometimes with a view to helping others and helping them discover a world that he himself had managed to tame. He was not satisfied by the mere appearance of things. He needed to know the gist of things, the heart of things. And it's certainly because of this concern that he, with turning himself constantly towards the essential, the real, that he remained a man at peace, a serene man, all the way until his last days, despite the suffering and the pain and hardship that he lived through. Jesus said in the text of St. John that I read to you, that there is no greater love than to offer up one's life to the ones one loves. And we have to say this sincerely, that political commitment is a demanding task, which demands a sacrifice of a great part of oneself towards the betterment of one's fellow man. And those who commit themselves to this must recall that their lives correspond to the greatest lessons offered up by the Gospels, the love of others, which represents the love of God. Those, if their commitment is a way of loving others, they are fulfilled in their endeavors. And I think that this conviction was an integral part of the life of the person we are celebrating here today. Pierre Trudeau did not expect to be a professor, deciding to become a professor of law, did not expect to become a political man. His type of intellectual undertakings, intelligence, his idealism, his cultural studies, his desire for freedom for all people made him a great counselor. If he accepted, pressed by his friends, to play a political role, that was not attractive to him at all at the time, but it was out of a concern for being useful in society. And death forces us to consider the essentials of our lives. We are fortunate if our talents helped others, if we were able to help others. We are fortunate if our object made us loved by others. The immense responsibilities borne by Pierre Trudeau as a head of state, his role in the world, his influence on our collective and private lives, none of this can cause us to forget that he himself only ever chose to serve life with the serenity that his own life allowed. Let us remind ourselves of the words of the prophet Daniel that we heard earlier. His leaves were beautiful, abundant, as were his fruits. Everyone could feed from these because, as Pierre said, there is no greater love than to offer up one's life to those one loves.
The prayers that follow will now express in more detail the intentions and the hopes of those that are gathered here.
J'inviterai maintenant les personnes qui ont la prière universelle à donner, à s'avancer ici à côté de l'ambon. Monsieur Roger Roland, Chaud-Narcinis, Jean-Mathieu Potvin, Beaukersim, Anne Danis, Alexandre Green et Gérald Val. Wow. Veuillez vous approcher, s'il vous plaît.
Prions avec confiance le Père Tout-Puissant, qui a ressuscité des morts son Fils unique Jésus-Christ, et disons-lui, souviens-toi Seigneur de ton amour. À chacune des intentions, nous reprendrons. Seigneur, écoute notre prière. Lord, hear our prayer.
Pour celui qui nous a quittés, afin qu'il trouve place dans la maison du Père pour la vie éternelle, prions le Seigneur.
Seigneur, écoute notre prière.
We are assembled here in faith and confidence to pray for our brother, Pierre Trudeau. Strengthen our hope that we may live in the expectation of your Son's coming. Lord, in thy mercy, hear our prayer.
Our prayer.
Pour ceux et celles qui cherchent un sens à leur vie, afin qu'ils découvrent dans la résurrection du Christ une lumière pour guider leurs recherches, prions le Seigneur.
Seigneur, écoute notre prière.
Many people die by violence, war, and famine each day. Show your mercy to those who suffer unjustly these sins against your love and gather them into the eternal kingdom of peace. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Pour les hommes et les femmes de notre temps, afin que leur vie sur la terre devienne plus fraternelle et plus juste. Prions, Seigneur.
Seigneur, écoute notre prière.
For all of us assembled here to worship in faith, that we may be gathered together again in God's kingdom, Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Pour tous ceux et celles qui se dévouent au service des autres afin qu'ils ne perdent pas de courage et trouvent la joie, prions le Seigneur.
Seigneur, écoute notre prière. Dieu qui appelle toute l'humanité à partager ta vie, accueille notre prière afin qu'elle serve au salut des vivants et des morts. Nous te le demandons par Jésus ton Fils, car il est notre frère près de toi pour les siècles des siècles. Amen. Lave-moi de mes fautes, Seigneur, de mon péché. Purifie-moi. Sœurs et frères, prions ensemble au moment d'offrir le sacrifice de toute l'Église. Prends en pitié, Dieu très bon, ton serviteur, M. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, pour qui nous te présentons le sacrifice de louange, que cette offrande de pardon et de paix lui obtienne de ressusciter pour la vie éternelle par Jésus le Christ, notre Seigneur. Amen. Le Seigneur soit avec vous. Élevons notre cœur. Pour tout ce qu'il y a de beau, de grand dans la vie de M. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, rendons grâce au Seigneur notre Dieu.
Cela est juste et bon.
Vraiment, il est juste et il est bon de te rendre gloire, de t'offrir notre action de grâce toujours et en tout lieu, à toi, Père très bon, Dieu éternel et tout-puissant, par le Christ notre Seigneur. C'est en lui qu'a resplendit pour nous l'espérance de la résurrection bienheureuse. Et si la loi de la mort nous afflige, la promesse de l'immortalité nous apporte la consolation. Car pour ceux et celles qui croient en toi, Seigneur, la vie n'est pas détruite, elle est transformée. Et lorsque prend fin leur séjour sur la terre, ils ont déjà une demeure éternelle dans les cieux. C'est pourquoi, avec les anges, avec les archanges, avec toutes les puissances d'en haut, tous les esprits bienheureux, nous chantons l'hymne de ta gloire, et sans fin, nous proclamons. Tu es vraiment saint, Dieu de l'univers. Toute la création proclame ta louange, car c'est toi qui donnes la vie. C'est toi qui sanctifies toutes choses par ton Fils Jésus-Christ notre Seigneur, avec la puissance de l'Esprit Saint. Et tu ne cesses de rassembler ton peuple, afin qu'il te présente partout dans le monde une offrande pure. C'est pourquoi nous te supplions de consacrer toi-même les offrandes que nous apportons. Sanctifie-les par ton Esprit, pour qu'elles deviennent le corps et le sang de ton Fils, Jésus-Christ notre Seigneur, qui nous a dit de célébrer ce mystère. La nuit même où il fut livré, il prit le pain. Entrant en grâce, il le bénit, il le rompit. Il le donna à ses disciples en disant, « Prenez et mangez-en tous, ceci est mon corps livré pour vous. » De même, à la fin du repas, il prit la coupe. Entrant en grâce, il la bénit. Il la donna à ses disciples en disant, « Prenez et buvez-en tous, car ceci est la coupe de mon sang, le sang de l'alliance nouvelle et éternelle, qui sera versé pour vous et pour la multitude en rémission des péchés. Vous ferez cela en mémoire de moi. » Il est grand le mystère de la foi. Nous proclamons ta mort, Seigneur Jésus. Nous célébrons ta résurrection. Nous attendons ta venue dans la gloire. En faisant mémoire de ton Fils, de sa passion qui nous sauve, de sa glorieuse résurrection et de son ascension dans le ciel, alors que nous attendons son dernier avènement, nous présentons cette offrande vivante et sainte pour te rendre grâce. Regarde, Seigneur, le sacrifice de ton Église et daigne y reconnaître celui de ton Fils qui nous a rétablis dans ton alliance. Quand nous serons nourris de son corps et de son sang et remplis de l'Esprit Saint, accorde-nous d'être un seul corps et un seul esprit dans le Christ.
Que l'Esprit Saint fasse de nous une éternelle offrande de ta gloire, pour que nous obtenions un jour les biens du monde à venir, auprès de la Vierge Marie, la bienheureuse Mère de Dieu, avec les apôtres, les martyrs, tous les saints et saintes qui ne cessent d'intercéder pour nous.
Lord, may this sacrifice which has made our peace with you advance the peace and salvation of all the world. Strengthen in faith and love your pilgrim church on earth, your servant Pope John Paul, our Bishop Jean-Claude Turcotte, myself and all the bishops with the clergy and the entire people your Son has gained for you. Father, hear the prayers of the family you have gathered here before you. In mercy and love, unite all your children wherever they may be.
Souviens-toi, Seigneur, de M. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, que tu l'as rappelé auprès de toi, puisqu'il a été baptisé dans la mort de ton Fils, accorde-lui de participer à sa résurrection, le jour où le Christ, ressuscitant des morts, rendra nos pauvres corps pareils à son corps glorieux. Souviens-toi aussi de toutes nos sœurs, de tous nos frères, défunts, de toutes ces personnes qui ont quitté le monde et dont tu connais la droiture. Reçois-les, Seigneur, dans ton royaume, où nous espérons être comblés de ta gloire tous ensemble et pour l'éternité. Quand tu essuieras toute larme de nos yeux, en te voyant, toi, notre Dieu, tel que tu es, nous te serons semblables éternellement. Et sans fin, nous chanterons ta louange par le Christ notre Seigneur, par qui tu donnes au monde toute grâce et tout bien. Par lui, avec lui et en lui, à toi, Dieu le Père Tout-Puissant, dans l'unité du Saint-Esprit, tout honneur et toute gloire pour les Nous te rendons grâce, Dieu notre Père, pour ce regard nouveau que ton amour nous donne sur notre vie et sur la vie de ceux et celles qui sont maintenant près de toi, entraînés par ceux-là même qui nous ont précédés, avec l'immense cortège de tous les saints, de toutes les saintes. Osons dire d'un seul cœur cette belle prière que tu nous as enseignée. Chacun pourra la dire dans sa langue. Notre Père qui es aux cieux, que ton nom soit sanctifié, que ton règne vienne, que ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain de ce jour. Pardonne-nous nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons aussi à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous soumets pas à la tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Délivre-nous de tout mal, Seigneur. Donne la paix à notre temps. Par ta miséricorde, libère-nous du péché. Rassure-nous devant les épreuves en cette vie, où nous espérons le bonheur que tu promets et l'avènement de Jésus-Christ, notre Sauveur. Seigneur Jésus-Christ, tu as dit à tes apôtres, « Je vous laisse la paix, je vous donne ma paix. Ne regarde pas nos péchés, mais la foi de ton Église. Et pour que ta volonté s'accomplisse, donne-lui toujours cette paix et conduis-la vers l'unité parfaite, toi qui règnes pour les siècles des siècles. Amen. Que la paix du Seigneur soit toujours avec vous. Heureux sont-ils les invités au repas du Seigneur. Voici l'agneau de Dieu. Voici celui qui enlève le péché du monde. Seigneur, je ne suis pas digne de te recevoir, mais dis seulement une parole et je serai guéri. Que le corps du Christ me garde pour la vie éternelle. Que le sang du Christ me garde pour la vie.
Et vous vous approcherez du poste de communion le plus près. You will see somebody that will be near you, and then you can go to communion. In the balcony, wait and you'll see. Ceux qui sont dans les galeries, vous pourrez attendre que quelqu'un se présente près de vous.
Prions encore une fois le Seigneur. Rénové par le sacrement qui donne la vie, nous te prions, Seigneur, pour notre frère, M. Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Puisque tu l'as admis dans le peuple de l'Alliance nouvelle, qu'il soit purifié par cette Eucharistie et connaisse un bonheur sans fin dans la paix du Christ. Par Jésus le Christ, notre Seigneur.
The former Prime Minister will now be eulogized by three people very close to him. Roy Heenan, his business partner and friend, Jacques Hébert, his longtime friend, and his son, Justin Trudeau. We begin with Roy Heenan.
Mon collègue Jacques Hébert va vous adresser la parole en français. Soit lui, soit moi pourrait rendre hommage
He or myself
à Pierre Elliott Trudeau
could
en
render
anglais ou en français.
homage to Pierre Elliott Trudeau
Et
in
on
both
serait compris
English and
par la
French,
majorité des Canadiens.
and we would be understood by a majority of Canadians.
Like most Canadians, I admired the Prime Minister that was Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Our political leaders have eloquently testified about him as a leader and as a public man. But I would like to talk to you for a few minutes about the private person who lived amongst us for the last 15 years. We came to know him as a warm, compassionate man, invariably courteous to anyone he met. He was unassuming. He walked to work. He cared not for the trappings of power. One could not walk along the streets beside him without being stopped by somebody who wanted to shake his hand or say a few words to him. He was invariably cordial, patient, and polite. I have also learned the warmth of his friendship, and I witnessed the depth of the love for his children. Justin, Sasha, Sarah, your father loved you and Mishu so very much. He was devoted to you, and he was so proud of you. No one could ever go into his office or talk to him for a few minutes without realizing that you were never far from his thoughts. The world knows that you have suffered a terrible loss, but you will bear it secure in the certain knowledge of his great love for you. That must be your strength. It has been said that Pierre Trudeau was aloof and distant. That is not the Pierre Trudeau I knew. On the contrary, he was caring, polite, and kind, and he had such judgment. It was a privilege to discuss with him matters of the moment and witness his acute analytical mind ready to engage in any discussion with enormous civility. I will also remember the vigorous man who loved the outdoors. He loved skiing. His skiing style can only be described as a daredevil, but he was afraid of no mountain, and he delighted in the challenge. It was with great regret that he told me last April that this winter was the first winter in 75 years that he had not skied, and he was sad. He loved the oceans, swimming and scuba diving, and of course, canoeing. He wrote that the art of governing has some parallels with the art of canoeing. Sometimes you have to fight against the current. He never hesitated to do that. I'm told that Pierre Elliott Trudeau died last Thursday. The man maybe but his ideas live on. I speak not as a politician, but as an ordinary citizen. Over the last few days, citizens by the tens of thousands have turned out to bear witness of their love and admiration for Pierre. We saw it in Ottawa on Parliament Hill. We saw it on the train that brought him back home to his beloved city. And we saw it again here in Montreal in the last 2 days. And why? Why do the citizens respond so spontaneously? Because he was a remarkable leader? That's true, but it's not because of that. It is because he created and articulated a vision of this country which resonates in the hearts and minds of millions of Canadians. He defended that vision both rationally and passionately, both at home and abroad. And what is that vision that is shared by so many? First, of peoples living together in harmony in a single state, and the brother not be turned against brother. Second, that we aspire to a just society, one that offers equality of opportunity. A vision of understanding of and charity towards others, particularly the less fortunate. That the two cultures of Canada flourish and be nurtured across this great land, and that other cultures enrich us. That bilingualism is an asset and not a liability. And of course, that the fundamental rights and freedoms be ensured and enshrined for all Canadians. This vision has changed forever the sense of ourselves as a society. This is his legacy to us. Ceci est le testament de Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
This is the testament of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who left to all Canadian men and women
We will also remember that on a deeper and more personal note,
that he loved so well.
he challenged us all to be the very best that we could be. We have been touched by greatness. Today, we say au revoir to Pierre, and we bury the body. But the vision continues. The vision lives.
Monsieur Jacques Hébert.
Pierre Trudeau aimait beaucoup
Pierre Trudeau
cette pensée d'Aristote.
very much loved this thought penned by
principal
Aristotle.
but
The
la
main
société
goal
que ses
of
membres
society is that
tant
its members
collectivement
be able to,
chacun en
as collectively and
vivre
individually,
une vie pleine.
live a full life.
Et tout le long de ses années à la tête du
And
gouvernement,
throughout his years as
il a
head of
poursuivi
government,
ce but avec
he
la ténacité qu'on lui
tenaciously tried to achieve this goal.
qu'il fallait
He was convinced that
aider les jeunes.
it was a priority to help young people blossom.
Au cours des derniers jours,
During
on a
the
beaucoup parlé
past few
de
days,
ses œuvres les plus
a lot has been said about his more spectacular endeavors, Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Constitution, official languages,
Mais
etc.
avons seulement évoqué sa compassion
But
immense
we also
pour la jeunesse.
heard mention of his immense compassion for the youth of this country. He never hesitated to put to the fore programs aimed at youth, such as youth opportunities,
Jeunesse Canada Monde et Katimavik, dont
Katimavik,
il me parlait encore avec
Canada
affection
World Youth. He still spoke to me fondly of Katimavik 10 days before his death in a barely audible voice, as if it was already coming from another world, another place. Hundreds of thousands of young people are now living fruitful and full lives thanks to one or the other of Pierre Trudeau's undertakings towards young people. This voiceless minority who, up until that time, had never seemed to interest or concern politicians. One day in 1959, a long time before his entry into politics, I had asked him for his help to help a young orphan who was having trouble with the rotten system that existed at the time. He was a orphan at that time, one of Duplessis' orphans, as we'd say today. Pierre Elliott Trudeau threw himself heart and soul into this struggle that lasted for many months until this young 19-year-old youth was able to recover both his freedom and dignity. One example among thousands of the generosity of this man when he was young and free, that some would call him a playboy because once in a while we'd see him on the ski slopes. Saturdays perhaps, but the rest of the week. And his friends can testify to that. He worked doggedly to write articles, memoirs that were going to feed the quiet revolution and come to task with received ideas. He was one of the most ardent defenders of the young labor movement in Quebec that was hardly tolerated at the time, and civil liberties that were often infringed. For those who admire him, Pierre Trudeau remains a hero and a giant among men, a kind of Superman, proud, courageous, knight in shining armor, of immense culture, uncommon intelligence that was placed at the disposal of Quebec and Canada, both the province and country that he loved passionately. And those who had the privilege and the joy of being a friend of his recall Pierre Trudeau much different than the public figure that the media never tires of. For his friends, Pierre Trudeau was first and foremost a good, happy friend, a simple human being with a delicacy of nature, generous, attentive, which might surprise those who never knew him and who have been known to use the word arrogance. He had an exquisite sense of what friendship meant, and that is why the illness and death of his friend Gérard Pelletier, our common friend, was a great blow to him. After the funeral, he sighed and said, quite an incredible expression coming from such a discreet man. He said, "I just have lost a bit of my soul." And the day we learned of his own death, an expected moment, how many amongst us felt the same thing, that a little bit of ourselves had just flown away.
Whether as friends or political foes, he profoundly marked us all by forcing us to think, to question ourselves, and debate ideas rather than feelings. Because of Pierre Trudeau, we have become better human beings, and Canada is now a more generous and caring country. As he once said, a country can be influential in the world by the size of its heart and the breadth of its mind. And this is the role that Canada can play. Parmi les qualités de Pierre Trudeau,
amongst Pierre Trudeau's qualities, there is one upon which everyone is unanimous until his last breath. He was an admirable father who gave the best of himself to his children. He could have allowed himself to become distracted, overwhelmed by the duties of being Prime Minister. He adored his three boys and his daughter, and with infinite patience he communicated his fundamental values to them, his love of culture, his love of nature, his sense of discipline. When I think of Pierre Trudeau, I always see him surrounded by his three boys at various stages of their lives, such as in the numerous photographs that line the walls of his office and home. We can all rejoice in one thing, at least. He died in peace, lucid, serene, accepting his fate, happy and surrounded by Justin, Sasha, and Margaret. And he well deserved this final moment. It is perhaps not correct to quote an agnostic in this church, but Trudeau loved Baudelaire so much. Happy is the man who can run in serene and happy fields, those whose thoughts, like larks, fly in the morning, fly over life, and understand without effort the language of both flowers and things unspoken. Goodbye, old brother. Rest in peace. And we will all continue to love you.
Maintenant, je demanderai à Justin de s'approcher.
Friends, Romans, countrymen. I was about 6 years old when I went on my first official trip. I was going with my father and my grandpa Sinclair up to the North Pole. It was a very glamorous destination. But the best thing about it was that I was going to be spending lots of time with my dad. Because in Ottawa, he just worked so hard. One day, we were in Elliott, Canada's northernmost point. A scientific, military installation that seemed to consist entirely of low, shed-like buildings and warehouses. Let's be honest, I was 6. There were no brothers around to play with. And I was getting a little bored because Dad still, somehow, had a lot of work to do. I remember a frozen, windswept Arctic afternoon when I was bundled up into a Jeep and hustled out on a special, top-secret mission. I figured I was finally going to be let into the reason for the existence of this high-security Arctic base. I was exactly right. We drove slowly through and past the buildings, all of them very gray and windy. And we rounded a corner and came upon a red one. We stopped. I got out of the Jeep and started to crunch across towards the front door. But I was told no. To the window. So I clambered over the snowbank, boosted up to the window, rubbed my sleeve against the frosty glass to see inside, and as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw a figure hunched over one of many work tables that seemed very cluttered. He was wearing a red suit with a furry white trim. And that's when I understood just how powerful and wonderful my father was. Pierre Elliott Trudeau. The very words convey so many things to so many people. Statesman, intellectual, professor, adversary, outdoorsman, lawyer, journalist, author, and prime minister. But more than anything, to me, he was Dad. And what a dad. He loved us with a passion and a devotion that encompassed his life. He taught us to believe in ourselves, to stand up for ourselves, to know ourselves, and to accept responsibility for ourselves. We knew that we were the luckiest kids in the world, and that we had done nothing to actually deserve it. It was instead something that we would have to spend the rest of our lives to work very hard to live up to. He gave us a lot of tools. We were taught to take nothing for granted. He doted on us, but didn't indulge. Many people say he didn't suffer fools gladly. But I'll have you know he had infinite patience with us. He encouraged us to push ourselves, to test limits, to challenge anyone and anything. But there were certain basic principles that could never be compromised. Like I guess it is for most kids. In grade 3, it was always a real treat to visit my dad at work. As on previous visits, this particular occasion included a lunch at the parliamentary restaurant, which always seemed terribly important and full of serious people that I didn't recognize. But at 8, I was becoming politically aware. And I recognized one, whom I knew to be one of my father's chief rivals. Thinking of pleasing my father, I told a joke about him, a generic, silly little grade school thing. My father looked at me sternly, with that look I would learn to know so well, and said, Justin, on n'attaque jamais l'individu.
Attack the
On peut
individual
être en
Justin.
désaccord complet
We can
avec
be
quelqu'un
in total disagreement with
sans
someone
pour autant le dénigrer.
without denigrating them as a consequence.
Et ce disant,
And saying that,
il se leva,
he stood up,
me prit la main
took me by the hand,
et m'amena rencontrer cet homme.
and brought me over to introduce me to this man.
C'était un gentil monsieur
He was a nice man
qui mangeait avec sa fille,
who was eating there with his
une
daughter,
jolie blonde un peu plus jeune que moi.
a nice-looking blonde girl, a little younger
Il
than
me
I was.
parla amicalement un moment.
He spoke to me in a friendly
Et ce
manner
fut
for a
dès
bit,
lors que je compris
and it's at that point that I
avoir
understood
des opinions différentes de celles d'une autre
that
personne
having opinions that are different
n'empêchait aucunement
from those of another
de leur porter le plus grand respect en tant qu'individu.
does not preclude one being deserving of respect as an individual.
Parce que la simple tolérance,
Because simple
ce
tolerance,
n'est pas assez.
mere tolerance is not
Un
enough.
respect réel et profond
We need genuine and deep respect for each and every human being, notwithstanding their thoughts, their values, their beliefs, their origins. That's what my father demanded of his sons. And that's what he demanded of his country.
Par amour,
He demanded this out of a sense of love,
amour de ses fils,
love of his sons,
amour de son pays.
love of his country.
Et c'est pour ça que nous l'aimons tant.
And that's why we love him so.
Les lettres, les fleurs,
The letters, the flowers,
dignité des foules,
the dignity shown by the crowds
adieu.
in bidding their farewells.
Tout ça pour le remercier
All of this as a
de nous avoir
thank you, as a thank you for having loved us so much.
my father's fundamental belief in the sanctity of the individual never came from a textbook. It stemmed from his deep love for and faith in all Canadians. And over the past few days, with every card, every rose, every tear, every wave, and every pirouette, you returned his love. It means the world to Sash and me. Thank you. We have gathered from coast to coast to coast, d'un océan à l'autre,
From one ocean to another,
united in our grief to say goodbye. But this is not the end. He left politics in '84, but he came back for Meech. He came back for Charlottetown. He came back to remind us of who we are and what we're all capable of. But he won't be coming back anymore. It's all up to us, all of us, now. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. He has kept his promises and earned his sleep. Je t'aime, papa.
Nous allons maintenant dire un dernier adieu à M. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, qui, toute sa vie, est resté fidèle à sa foi et à ses racines chrétiennes. Recueillons-nous en pensant à l'avenir qui lui est réservé selon notre foi. Recueillons-nous en pensant à ce que Pierre Elliott Trudeau représente pour nous et à ce qu'il est pour Dieu. En signe de respect pour M. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, voici cet encens qu'il monte devant Dieu avec notre prière. Nous espérons et nous croyons que tous, un jour, nous ressusciterons. En signe de cette foi, je bénis ce corps avec la même eau qui a servi à son baptême dans l'Église. Avec cette même eau, je bénis son corps au nom du Père, du Fils et de l'Esprit. Dieu notre Père, fortifie notre foi et notre espérance, tandis que nous conduisons vers son dernier repos celui dont tu sais tout le labeur et le travail accompli sur cette terre. Nous t'en prions, que tout ce qui était saint et grand pour lui soit respecté et préservé, que lui soit pardonné ce qu'il a pu faire de mal et que soit reconnu ce qu'il a fait de bien. Par Jésus ton Fils, mort et ressuscité, lui qui vit et règne avec toi et l'Esprit, maintenant et pour les siècles des siècles.
For the signing of the documents, this is a long tradition in French Canada, and it recalls the days when the church documents were also the official state documents. And so Mr. Trudeau's sons are now going to sign the official record of the funeral and burial of their father.
Sœurs et frères, que toute marque d'affection, que tout geste d'amitié que vous donnerez soit pour vous un signe de cette paix qu'ensemble nous avons cherchée. Allons maintenant dans la joie et dans la paix du Christ.
Singing of the national anthem, both inside and outside, marking the end of the funeral service, and now the procession out of the basilica will begin. And what an incredible service it was. Now, sometimes in the moment you often overstate. It would be hard to overstate what we've witnessed here in the last couple of hours, especially the speech. I don't think there's anyone who will be confused about which speech I'm speaking. Justin Trudeau's eulogy for his father was quite remarkable. Mixing humor with passion, understanding with vigor, gratitude with deep emotion. It was, without question, a speech unlike anything I have ever witnessed in my time.
In the same way that the country has returned the love that Pierre Trudeau gave it through his entire lifetime, we saw his sons, and through Justin, return the love that Trudeau bestowed on them. Every father in the country could only dream of a child standing up and speaking those things about him. I think we're going to hear from Justin Trudeau again.
I think so. If he wants to. But it was, it really was a remarkable moment. And that's not taking anything away from the other remarks of this day. Jacques Pierre as well, talking about his lifelong friend. How he had died lucid and serene and accepting his fate. And how he talked about the different visions in the country and how Pierre Trudeau had forced us on that issue to debate ideas and not just feelings. Father Manette, please.
Yes, well, as you're speaking there, it reminds me how this was rooted in the gospel, and as Father Dubuc mentioned, the gospel which was chosen by the Trudeau family was about God the Father's love for us and our return of God's love for us to God that we were celebrating in the funeral, so that the human love that is so much part of this morning reflects the love of God, and this was so essential to Mr. Trudeau's
CBC Montreal, broadcasting throughout Quebec.
We're so infused by his Christian upbringing and his respect and love for each individual person.
Justin began his eulogy with the line, friends, Romans, and countrymen, of course, taken from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. And that funeral oration, of course, is one that the whole world knows about. And now we have a funeral oration that this country will always remember.
Oh, it will certainly be the moment after 5 days of so many moments. One will never forget those words. There's so many images that we all have of this former Prime Minister. Justin's image of him dressed up as Santa Claus near the North Pole up at Elliott is one I don't think any of us had ever imagined before. The pealing of the bells at Notre Dame Basilica as the body of Pierre Elliott Trudeau is taken from the Basilica. The final steps in public. Margaret and Suzette, sister of Pierre Trudeau. His brother passed away in the early 1990s. Time now for the goodbyes. Prime Minister thanking former U.S. President Jimmy Carter as Margaret looks on. Now, as we've mentioned before, the family has not released where the burial will take place. It will be private. They've asked that that be respected, that they not be followed. You know, there will be comparisons made to other sons of other departed leaders from other countries. We don't need those comparisons. Cortege about to depart Notre Dame Basilica in downtown Montreal. Our final glimpses, the final journey. During the service, the military guard of honor formed outside along the street in front of the basilica. If that young girl wanted to pass her rose up, so many have over these past few days. Waves to the family as the procession slowly eases its way from the basilica. Roses being thrown out onto the street in front of the procession. Will we ever see his like again? I don't think so.
People spontaneously breaking into old Canada.
And applause along the side of the street.
The funeral had grandeur and dignity and grace and humor. And it was also wonderfully Canadian.
I'm sure that of all the ceremonies that have been held in this very historic church in Montreal, that this will probably be the grandest.
Well, there certainly have been more than a few recently. The Rocket, Maurice Richard, just a few months ago.
The historian in me thinks that it's not since Sir George Cartier in 1873 has there been, and who was the Prime Minister of Canada, has there been anything of this magnitude in this place.
Well, it's certainly the largest state funeral in the country's history, witnessed by the overwhelming numbers that have taken part in this over the past few days in Ottawa, along the railway line to Montreal and here in Montreal. And those pictures of the people who'd come. The honorary pallbearers list, reading like a who's who on the international and the national stage. We wondered before the service whether Jimmy Carter and Fidel Castro had ever met before. I thought they had, and in fact they had at least once. About 11 years ago in Venezuela, at the installation of a new president in Venezuela, they were both there in attendance and met and talked for some time. But no sitting president has ever, at least formally, met with the Cuban leader. There was talk of a brief moment, Clinton and Castro at the UN just a few weeks ago. They bumped into each other. Roses being taken out to the car.
But it was a remarkable scene in front of the church just before the funeral to see President Fidel Castro, the leader of Cuba, there joking, charming with Jimmy Carter, former U.S. president, and both these men come to pay tribute to a friend in Pierre Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau's last peace mission. Yeah.
Prime Minister and Madame Chrétien, deeply affected by these past few days. Still a stunned silence almost, a part of so many who were inside the Basilica. These past few days have been very hard, especially for the very close friends and political colleagues and adversaries to realize suddenly that he is gone. He got such a figure on the national stage, and both during and after for a considerable length of time. He was a powerful voice. And it was only in the last year that we suddenly realized that he was suddenly growing old. And only in the last month or so that publicly it became known that he was fighting a serious illness or illnesses, the Parkinson's, the prostate cancer, and a mild stroke earlier this summer. So we're into those last few moments of our coverage and an opportunity for some of those who have taken part in it to wrap up with some of their final thoughts on these past few days. Let's start with the CBC's Dennis Trudeau, who's actually at just outside City Hall for the lying in state that took place over the last 24 hours. And Dennis, you watched all this.
Of City Hall with Margaret, Justin, Sasha, Deborah Coyne, and Sarah Coyne, her daughter, Pierre Trudeau's daughter. And then Jacques Hébert's reference in his eulogy to the hypocrisy of the 50s over illegitimate children, that he called them, and how Pierre Trudeau had fought that legal battle for an orphan. And that made me think of Pierre Trudeau's
Dennis,
effect.
we're not being fair to you here because we're having a problem hearing you. All right, I'm told we can hear you now.
We can
Go
hear
ahead.
me? Okay, so Peter. And Jacques Hébert's reference to the hypocrisy of the 50s towards matters sexual. And I think, Pierre Trudeau, the man who said the state had no business in the bedrooms of the nation. I think part of this funeral here today, that image on the steps of City Hall and Jacques Hébert reminds us how much, and people who weren't alive then should know, how much we have changed in this country from the 60s to the year 2000. And some great measure of that is Pierre Elliott Trudeau's doing.
All right, Dennis, thanks very much. David Halton was outside the Basilica. You saw him as a number of people were going in. He had an opportunity to talk to them. David, you covered the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister during the 70s and 80s. Your thoughts?
Well, Peter, I must say, watching the service on this giant screen behind us from outside the Basilica, it had a beauty to it and a finality that almost leaves one speechless at this point. But a few moments that perhaps you didn't notice on your cameras as the funeral party was going into the Basilica at the outset, Justin Trudeau summoned a couple of protocol people and said, asked them to go out and find a small girl in the crowd. And they found a girl called Isabel. I think she was about 10-year-old, and Justin Trudeau insisted that she be given a red rose and asked for the girl to come out of the crowd and put that red rose on the coffin of Pierre Trudeau. And one of the innumerable, immensely moving moments that have marked this day.
Thanks, David. Yes, we saw parts of that, and we weren't sure whether she'd been given a rose or she was trying to give a rose, but now you've straightened that out for us, and that is a very touching story. Jason Moskowitz also covered Pierre Trudeau and has been part of our broadcast team over these past few days. Jason?
The faces, Peter, the faces of 30, 40 years of Canadian and Quebec history, just one face after another walking by. Another observation how Pierre Trudeau's political colleagues, the people that worked in his office, were here an hour and a half before the funeral service began, organizing, just as they would have done 20 years ago when he was in the Prime Minister's office. One last thing, expectation. Everybody knew that when Pierre Trudeau would pass away, there would be an expression by people across the country. It exceeded expectations, everybody says that. And for the final act, the funeral service, I think anybody who was here would say that this too exceeded all expectations.
All right, Jason, thanks very much. Jason Moskowitz, outside the Basilica. Well, Brian McKenna, who has been sitting by me here throughout the past couple of hours, and who, of course, was involved in the documentary work, memoirs that he and his brother put together, that is running once again on CBC television these days. Brian, how do you sum this up?
Oh, Peter, it's he has a way of moving you in strange ways. Looking down the line of broadcasters, both English and French here, and seeing not a dry eye in the house as Justin Trudeau was speaking. But I guess the image that I'll hold with me always was him that last time with us in a canoe, getting in the canoe and then just sort of drifting off to the lake and then paddling hard off into the distance. And that's the memory I'll always hold of Pierre Trudeau. Strong, confident, believing in the future, feeling safe and secure in the legacy he left behind, but knowing that others had to pick up the task, as Justin said so eloquently.
It was this time of year, too, wasn't it, that you shot some of that scene?
It wasn't far from where I have a place in the Laurentian Mountains, on the Red River, on the Rouge River. And just go down, the night he died, I went down and just felt the water flowing in
front of my place, the same water that he was canoeing in, and just this shiver goes through you when you're in the North Woods and you think of Pierre Trudeau.
You know, Jacques Hébert said in his eulogy about how the final days, the former Prime Minister was lucid and serene, accepting his fate. He was strong at the end, I guess, as he had been throughout his life. It's trying to imagine those moments, what he might have been feeling about death. Did you talk to him at all about that in those times about death?
No, he would never. For him, you know, with people who knew him, apart from his spiritual advisors, he really wouldn't speak about his fate in those ways, you know.
Right.
He just had a great sense of serenity, as people have said over and over again. The serenity of this man in the face of whatever he had to face.
I guess I was thinking about it sort of in general terms. I know that when he spoke at the passing of Louis Saint-Laurent, who died while he was in office, while Trudeau was in office, he talked about that in fact it's a time of peace, that they are now at rest and at peace, and that we shouldn't be sad. We should recognize that they are at peace.
Pierre Trudeau hated mourning of any kind. You know, this is a man who loved to have a good time, who loved his family, but he loved to go out and be a citizen of the world, and now he's a citizen of another world, and we're all luckier for it.
Brian McKenna, and we do appreciate your time, as we do Father Jacques Manette, who I last worked with 16 years ago when the Pope was here.
Yes,
in Canada on that tour across the country. And we thank you too for your words of advice and wisdom about the service we just witnessed. Well, time to wrap things up and to let you know that there will be obviously much more coverage on the story throughout today. There will be a special 2-hour edition of The National tonight at 9 o'clock, 9:30 in Newfoundland. It will be seen on CBC NewsWorld at 8 p.m. And we invite you to also on CBC NewsWorld, I believe it's at 10 o'clock Eastern Time tonight, a complete repeat of the highlights of the funeral service today. But it has been a remarkable 5-day period in the life of this country as the nation says goodbye to a former Prime Minister, a man who provoked all emotions possible. We will not forget him. I'm Peter Mansbridge in Montreal. Thanks for watching.
There's no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nation.
Si mon nom est québécois, mon nom est canadien aussi. C'est ça mon nom.
How far would you extend that? Just watch me.
Well, welcome to the 1980s.
If it's going to go, does it go with a bang rather than with a whimper?
We now join programming in progress.
CBC Montreal, broadcasting throughout Quebec.
Those residential schools.